So the big question for people trying to establish a new colony is, how do we get there? Now, I'm not talking like, oh, well, let's use boats. I mean, who is going to pay for this? These settlement attempts are taking people and sending them to the middle of nowhere and trying to get them to stay alive and create a permanent settlement. That's really hard to do, and no one had really done it to that point. So you run a chance of someone investing a ton of money into something and then having everyone die and they lose all that money. So they came up with a new idea, and that's called a joint stock company. Essentially, it works like this. Before, I would be the solo investor. I would be the one who put in all the money. And if the settlement worked, I made money. But if the settlement died, I lost everything I had invested. With the joint stock company, I get some of my close friends to also invest. And we pool our money to create the funds to pay for this settlement attempt. Now, if the settlement attempt succeeds, I still make money, my friends make money. But if the settlement fails, instead of me losing all of the money I would have put in on my own, I only lose a smaller portion. So that makes more people willing to invest. So the Virginia company is created as one of these joint stock companies. And once they get a charter from the king, that basically just allows them to settle on the land, because after all, it is all the king's land, they set out to try and create Jamestown. And this expedition they set forth is going to end up creating the first permanent settlement in the British America. Okay, now we know Jamestown eventually works because we know the history, but for a while at the beginning, it didn't look like they were going to be successful. They had a few problems that they ran into. Problem one, location. Now, the settlers, when they came down and reached America, they settled in the Chesapeake Bay in Virginia. They basically picked the first area that they saw and they set up camp and said, this is where we're going to live. And there were a couple problems with that. For starters, they settled directly next to a swamp. Now, swamps aren't helpful for a few reasons. One, they don't smell great. Two, there is no ability for you to grow crops there because it's a swamp. And three, mosquitoes live in swamps. And that is going to help spread diseases, which kill settlers. Problem two, most settlers on the voyage thought that the way they were going to make money on this adventure was to land in Jamestown, go out, dig in the ground, find gold, bring the gold back to England, and be rich. So they spent their time when they were in Jamestown not building shelter or planting crops or anything like that. They went out and dug in the ground to try and find gold. And they didn't find gold. Problem three, the area they settled in was right in the middle of Native American land, specifically the Powhatan Indian tribe. They were none too pleased with these settlers showing up in the middle of their land, but we'll come back to them in a minute. And problem four, since no one was building shelter or planting crops or generally getting prepared for when there'd be a winter or when the food they brought from England ran out, and since there also wasn't a lot of great leadership, they're going to enter a period of time called the Starving Time. Now, this is in the winter of 1609 to 1610, facing a harsh winter with little to no supplies and unable to go out of the fort for fear of Native Americans. The settlers starved. In their hunger, they turned to eating shoe leather, horses, and in some cases, even eating people. There's a story about a man whose wife died, and instead of going to the people and letting them know his wife died, he hid her body in his house. And over time, he would eat off of her body. Now, eventually, the townspeople find out about that, and they hang the man for the crime he committed. By the end of the winter, when others had arrived from England, the population of Jamestown had gone from over 300 people to just 60. So I guess the big question is, if all of these bad things happened, why was Jamestown successful in the first place? And there's three reasons for that. Reason one, John Smith. John Smith became the voice of reason in Jamestown. He saw all of the problems the settlers were making by going out and looking for gold, so he came up with one easy rule. He who does not work shall not eat. Essentially what that means is, feel free to go out and look for gold on your spare time if you want to, but don't think you're going to come back to Jamestown and eat food that night. In order to eat, you're going to need to make Jamestown better by either building shelter or growing food. This shocked the settlers into action, and they started building shelter and growing crops. Reason two, Pocahontas. Now, I'm sure you've heard the story of Pocahontas before, and That story's not really true. Now, a couple things are true. John Smith was captured by the Powhatan tribe. Pocahontas did save him, but that's kind of where the similarities end. Oh, and prevailing historians agree that Pocahontas saving John Smith was probably pre-planned. It wasn't her saving John Smith because she loved him. It was more Powhatan showing these white settlers that he could kill them at any time, but by the grace of his family, they were still alive. The significance of this meeting is that it is going to start building a relationship between the Powhatan Indians and the white settlers at Jamestown. And the Powhatans are going to be very helpful in helping Jamestown become successful. They sell them corn, they teach them how to farm, and in the early years, they're actually going to be peaceful towards the Jamestown settlers. Pocahontas also went on to marry into the Jamestown Settlement, which created an even closer relationship between those two groups. In fact, she's going to be marrying reason 3 why Jamestown is successful. John Rolfe figured out how to grow tobacco. Rolfe's major contribution to Jamestown had a more significant impact than any other. Known as the golden weed, tobacco couldn't be grown in Europe, but Europeans loved it. The growth and sale of tobacco soon dominated Jamestown, Virginia, and the entire South. Now investors needed tons of cheap labor, so they turned to poor, young Englishmen. These men faced crippling poverty if they stayed in England, or untold success if they moved to the New World. So they tried to move to the New World. The problem they were faced with was how to pay for the ticket to the New World. And that's where rich investors came in. So a rich investor would approach a poor young man and say, hey, I will pay for your journey over to the New World, and in return, you can pay me back by working for me for 5 to 7 years. Once those 5 to 7 years were up, you would become free and you could go about and live your own life. Those people are called indentured servants. Because of this, indentured servants are going to flood into the New World. And there's also an incentive for investors to make sure indentured servants came to the New World, and that was called the Headright System. So under the Headright System, any investor who sent over a indentured servant would get 50 acres of free land.